Tears soaked the flour on Clara's hands as she hid in the darkest corner of the estate's kitchen, desperately trying to muffle her sobs. She was just the overweight, invisible maid. But when the heavy oak doors slammed shut and the deadbolt clicked, she looked up to see the city's most feared boss staring down at her. Clara Higgins was invisible, or rather, she desperately wished she was. At 240 pounds, she felt she took up far too much space in the pristine, merciless world of the Romano Syndicate's central estate. The sprawling, high-security mansion, nestled in the secluded hills of upstate New York, was a fortress of cold marble imported Venetian glass, and even colder people. It was a place where physical perfection and lethal capability were the only currencies that mattered. Clara possessed neither. She was 26 with soft, round features, a double chin she constantly tried to hide by tilting her head downward, and thick thighs that chafed under the cheap, stiff fabric of her standard-issue maid's uniform. She had taken the job out of pure desperation. Her father's medical debts had piled up, and traditional housekeeping gigs in the city didn't pay nearly enough to keep the bank from foreclosing on their tiny apartment in Queens. The Romano family paid triple the market rate for domestic staff, with the unspoken caveat that you saw nothing, heard nothing, and endured whatever abuse was hurled your way by the maid men and the senior staff. For the past 8 months, Clara's existence had been a living hell. The cruelty wasn't just physical exhaustion from scrubbing miles of Italian tile, it was deeply, agonizingly personal. The head housekeeper, a razor-thin, severe woman named Isabella, had taken an immediate, vicious disliking to Clara. Isabella viewed Clara's size as a personal affront to the aesthetic of the Romano household. "Look at you sweating like a pig just from walking up the servants' stairs." Isabella would sneer, her voice dripping with venom as she inspected Clara's work. "Try not to break the floorboards, Higgins. Mr. Romano didn't import Brazilian mahogany to have it crushed by a walking bakery." Clara would just bite the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper, keeping her eyes fixed on her sensible non-slip shoes. She couldn't afford to talk back. She needed the money. The worst of it, however, came from the lower-level enforcers. Young, arrogant men filled with adrenaline and violence who found Clara to be an easy target for their cruel amusement. They called her Dumpling, tripped her in the hallways and intentionally dropped plates of rich pasta onto the rugs just to watch her struggle to her knees to scrub the stains. Dominic Romano, the head of the family, was a ghost to her. He was a terrifying, imposing figure who ruled the northeast seaboard with an iron fist and a calculated sociopathic brilliance. Clara had only seen him a handful of times, a broad-shouldered, towering man in impeccably tailored Brioni suits with eyes the color of dark slate. He was 32, exuded a raw, terrifying power, and never spared a glance for the hired help. To him, Clara was just another piece of moving furniture. Or so she thought. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Tuesday evening. The estate was hosting a massive sit-down dinner for the capos from the Chicago outfit. The tension in the house was palpable, the air thick with cigar smoke and the scent of expensive bourbon. Clara had been working for 14 hours straight, her feet swollen and her lower back screaming in agony. Isabella had ordered her to carry a heavy antique silver tray loaded with fresh crystal glasses to the main dining room. As Clara navigated the narrow hallway adjacent to the kitchen, she encountered Lorenzo, one of Dominic's most trusted lieutenants, flanked by 2 of his loud-mouthed soldiers. "Watch out, boys, wide load coming through." Lorenzo smirked, holding his drink. Clara kept her eyes down, murmuring, "Excuse me, please." As she tried to squeeze past, one of the soldiers stuck his heavy combat boot out. Clara's momentum carried her forward. She tripped, plunging toward the hardwood floor. The heavy silver tray crashed down with a deafening, echoing clatter, shattering thousands of dollars worth of baccarat crystal into a million glittering shards. Clara hit the floor hard, her knees taking the brunt of the impact. The air rushed out of her lungs, but the physical pain was eclipsed by the immediate, devastating humiliation. The men erupted into raucous laughter. Jesus felt the house shake on that one. One of them howled. Isabella materialized from the shadows, her face contorted in absolute fury. Instead of checking if Clara was hurt, she grabbed Clara by the collar of her uniform, the cheap fabric tearing with a loud rip, exposing Clara's pale, heavy shoulder and the strap of her bra. "You stupid, clumsy, fat cow!" Isabella hissed, spittle flying onto Clara's cheek. "You're a disaster. You're paying for this crystal, and then you're out on the street. Get out of my sight before I have the boys throw you in the incinerator." Humiliation burned in Clara's chest like battery acid. Tears pricked her eyes hot and fast. Clutching the torn fabric of her dress to cover her exposed skin, she scrambled to her feet, her face flushed crimson. The laughter of the men chased her as she ran blindly down the hall, pushing through the heavy swinging doors of the industrial kitchen. The kitchen was empty. The chefs had already served the main course and retired to the smoking patio. The room was vast, filled with gleaming stainless steel, sub-zero refrigerators, and the lingering heavy scent of garlic roasted lamb and red wine. Clara collapsed into the darkest corner, sliding down the side of a massive flour bin. She pulled her knees to her chest, her large frame shaking violently as the sobs finally broke free. She buried her face in her flour-dusted hands, weeping for her father, for the crushing debt for her own hated body, and for the sheer cruelty of the world. She cried until her throat was raw, gasping for air in the quiet hum of the kitchen appliances. She was so consumed by her misery that she didn't hear the swinging doors open. She didn't hear the heavy measured footsteps crossing the Italian tile. What she did hear, however, was the sound of the heavy oak double doors being pushed shut, followed by the loud, unmistakable click of the deadbolt sliding into place. Clara's breath hitched. She froze, terrified. She looked up through her tear-blurred vision. Standing there silhouetted by the harsh fluorescent lights was Dominic Romano. He wasn't looking at the stoves. He wasn't looking at the refrigerators. His slate-grey eyes were locked directly onto her huddled, trembling form. He slowly reached up, loosening his silk tie, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscle ticked visibly beneath his skin. He took a step closer, towering over her. Clara pressed herself harder against the flour bin, wishing she could melt into the wall. She was fired. Worse, he was going to hurt her for making a scene. Instead, Dominic knelt. The pristine fabric of his dark suit trousers brushed against the flour-dusted floor. He reached out his large, rough hand, gently grasping her chin, forcing her to look into his terrifying, beautiful face. "Who hurt you?" His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Clara couldn't speak. Her vocal cords felt completely paralyzed. Dominic Romano, a man who allegedly ordered hits with a flick of his wrist, a man who controlled politicians and police chiefs, was kneeling in spilled flour, holding her face with a gentleness that completely short-circuited her brain. I... Clara stammered, fresh tears spilling over his thumb, which was resting against her cheek. Dominic's eyes tracked the tear. His gaze then dropped, taking in the violent tear in her uniform, the red, angry marks on her exposed shoulder, where Isabella had grabbed her, and the way Clara instinctively tried to cross her arms over her heavy stomach and chest to hide herself from him. A dark, terrifying storm brewed in his eyes. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I asked you a question, Clara," he said. The fact that he knew her name sent a jolt of electricity down her spine. "I was conducting a meeting. I heard a crash. I came out to see my men laughing, and I saw my head housekeeper looking entirely too pleased with herself. And now I find you hiding in my kitchen weeping and bleeding." He brushed his thumb lightly over a small scrape on her collarbone that she hadn't even realized she had. "Give me a name." "Mr. Romano, please." Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "It was my fault. I'm clumsy. I'm too big for the hallway. I tripped. I broke the crystal. I'll pay for it. I swear, just please don't hurt me." "Stop," Dominic commanded. It wasn't a yell, but the sheer authority in his tone snapped her mouth shut. "Do not lie to me. Do not make excuses for them, and never ever insult yourself in my presence again. I saw Lorenzo's man stick his foot out. I saw Isabella grab you." Clara gasped, her eyes widening. "He saw you saw." She breathed the words escaping before she could stop them. "I see everything that happens in my house." Dominic stated his voice, devoid of emotion, though his eyes burned with a lethal intensity. He stood up slowly, bringing his full, intimidating height to bear. He shrugged off his custom-tailored suit jacket, a piece of clothing worth more than Clara's car, and draped it over her shoulders. The jacket was massive on her, smelling of expensive cedar-fine tobacco, and something uniquely masculine and dark. It covered her torn dress, cocooning her in sudden warmth. "Stand up, Clara," he instructed softly. Clara struggled, her knees bruised and her heavy frame lacking grace. She expected him to look away in disgust as she awkwardly pushed herself up. But instead, Dominic reached down, gripping her forearms and pulling her to her feet with effortless, shocking strength. "Wait here," he said. He didn't lock the door as he left. But Clara couldn't have moved if the building were on fire. She stood frozen in the center of the kitchen, clutching the lapels of the Mafia Boss's jacket, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Outside the kitchen, the sounds of the mansion changed. The low murmur of the dinner party abruptly halted. Clara crept toward the swinging doors, pushing one open just a fraction of an inch to peer into the hallway. The scene playing out in the grand foyer made her blood run cold. Dominic stood at the bottom of the grand staircase. Lorenzo, his underboss, was standing there with the two soldiers, the smirks completely wiped from their faces. Isabella was standing off to the side, looking pale and uncertain. The visiting capos from Chicago were watching from the dining room doors, completely silent. "Lorenzo!" Dominic's voice carried clearly, cold as ice. "Who gave you permission to treat my staff like animals?" "Dom boss, come on," Lorenzo chuckled nervously, holding his hands up. It was a joke. The fat girl is a klutz. She practically threw herself on the floor. "You're not going to make a scene in front of the guests over a maid, are you?" Dominic didn't say a word. He moved with a speed that defied his size. In a blur of motion, Dominic closed the distance, grabbed Lorenzo by the throat, and slammed the underboss against the marble wall with enough force to crack the plaster. The two soldiers immediately reached for their waistbands, but stopped dead as half a dozen of Dominic's personal guards drew their weapons and aimed them squarely at their heads. "You embarrass me in my own home," Dominic hissed, his face inches from Lorenzo's turning purple visage. "You abuse a woman under my roof. You think this is a joke." He dropped Lorenzo, who fell to the floor, coughing and gasping. Dominic turned to the soldier who had tripped Clara. "Break his leg," Dominic ordered his guards casually. "Boss, wait, no." The soldier's plea was cut short by a sickening crunch as a guard drove a steel-toed boot into his knee. The man's agonizing scream echoed through the high ceilings. Clara clamped a hand over her mouth, violently trembling. This was the monster everyone whispered about. This was the devil. And he was doing this. For her, Dominic then turned his dead-eyed gaze to Isabella. The head housekeeper was shaking so hard, her teeth were audibly chattering. "Isabella," Dominic said, walking slowly toward her. "You have been in my employ for 5 years. You keep a clean house, but you have an ugly soul. You humiliated a girl who works 10 times harder than you do. Mr. Romano, she ruined the uniform. Pack your bags." Dominic interrupted, his voice a lethal whisper. "You have 10 minutes to get off my property. If I ever see your face in New York again, I will have you buried under the new casino site in Atlantic City. Do you understand me?" Isabella burst into tears, nodding frantically, and scrambled up the stairs as fast as her legs could carry her. Dominic adjusted his cuffs, perfectly composed, turning back to the shocked Chicago capos, as if he hadn't just ordered a man crippled in his foyer. "My apologies, gentlemen. A slight housekeeping issue. Please return to your cigars." Clara backed away from the door, retreating into the kitchen. She was terrified. She was practically hyperventilating when the kitchen doors swung open again. Dominic stepped back in his eyes, scanning the room until they found her. The cold, ruthless monster was gone, replaced once again by the man who had knelt in the flour. "It's handled," he said simply. "You will no longer take orders from the general staff. You work directly for me now. My private quarters, top floor. Go to the east wing, find an empty guest room and rest. I will send a doctor up to look at your knees." "Mr. Romano, I can't," Clara whispered, tears welling up again. "I'm not cut out for this. I'm ugly. I'm fat. I ruin everything. Why are you doing this?" Dominic crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just inches from her. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable before his hand came up again. This time he didn't just touch her face. He let his fingers trail down her neck, resting against her rapid pulse, his thumb grazing the soft, full curve of her jawline. "Do not tell me what I find beautiful in my own house." "Clara," he murmured, his eyes dropping to her lips. "Go upstairs. We will discuss your new duties tomorrow." The transition from the grueling hidden servants' quarters to the sprawling, silent expanse of the penthouse wing was jarring. Clara was given a suite that was larger than her entire childhood home in Queens. It had a king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, a bathroom adorned in black marble, and a walk-in closet where someone had magically stocked high-end, comfortable clothing that actually fit her plus-sized body. Perfectly soft cashmere sweaters, wide-leg linen pants, and silk robes. No more stiff, scratchy Maid uniforms. For the first week, her new duties felt like a phantom joke. She barely saw Dominic. Her instructions left on heavy cream cardstock on the kitchen counter of his private suite were simple. "Ensure my coffee is ready at 6 a.m. Keep the private library dusted. Do not touch the files on the mahogany desk." It took her less than 2 hours a day to complete the work. The rest of the time she was alone in the quiet luxury of the top floor. She waited for the other shoe to drop. Men like Dominic Romano didn't perform acts of charity. She was a pawn in some twisted mob game, or perhaps he was saving her for some cruel private joke. Her insecurities, fed by a lifetime of societal rejection regarding her weight, whispered that she was entirely unlovable, entirely unworthy of this sudden elevation. But then the late-night encounters began. Dominic often returned to the estate well past midnight, smelling of cordite whiskey and the cold city air. One night, Clara, unable to sleep, was in his private kitchen, making herself a cup of chamomile tea. She was wearing one of the oversized silk robes over her cotton nightgown, her thick, dark hair tied up in a messy bun. The private elevator dinged. Dominic walked in. He looked exhausted. His tie was gone, the top 3 buttons of his shirt undone, revealing a dusting of dark chest hair and the edge of an old, jagged scar. He stopped in the doorway of the kitchen, staring at her. Clara froze the mug halfway to her lips, instantly hyper-aware of how wide her hips looked in the silk, how her stomach pressed against the fabric. "I'm sorry, I should have been in my room," she stammered, moving to put the mug down and scurry away. "Stay," he ordered. It was a command, but softly spoken. He walked into the kitchen, his heavy presence filling the space. He didn't go to the liquor cabinet. Instead, he sat at the marble island, resting his elbows on the surface, looking at her. "Pour me a cup of whatever that is." Clara nervously poured a second cup of tea, her hands shaking slightly. She placed it in front of him. "Sit with me," he said. She perched awkwardly on the edge of the bar stool opposite him. For a long time, the only sound was the ticking of the expensive wall clock. "Why do you hide, Clara?" he asked suddenly, his slate eyes piercing through her defenses. "I'm not hiding," she deflected, looking down at her hands. "You walk like you're apologizing for existing," Dominic noted, taking a sip of the floral tea, grimacing slightly, but drinking it anyway. "You wear clothes that are too big for you, even the ones I had bought. You flinch when anyone speaks to you. You carry your weight like it's a crime." "In this world it usually is," Clara whispered bitterly. "Look at the women you surround yourself with, Mr. Romano. They look like runway models. I look like me." Dominic set the mug down with a sharp clack. "Those women are statues, cold, empty, and easily broken. They starve themselves to fit into a mold created by weak men who are terrified of substance." He leaned forward, the distance between them closing. "I am not a weak man, Clara. I like softness. I like a woman who feels real. When I wrapped my jacket around you that night, I didn't see a flaw. I saw a survivor." Clara's breath hitched. No one had ever spoken to her like this. The intensity in his gaze made her feel exposed, but strangely cherished. Over the next month, these midnight meetings became a routine. They would sit in the dim light of the kitchen or the library. He would tell her sanitized versions of his day, dealing with politicians at the Osteria Morini in Manhattan, managing the shipment logistics at the Red Hook terminal. Real places, real problems. He never spoke of the violence, but she saw the weight of it in the dark circles under his eyes. In return, she opened up about her father. She told him about the medical bills, the struggle of watching the man who raised her wither away from heart disease. She told him about the cruelties of high school, the way her body had always been a battleground. Dominic listened with a terrifying, absolute focus. The dynamic in the house had shifted dramatically. The lower staff whispered about her. Lorenzo, whose throat still bore faint bruises from Dominic's grip, glared at her with a thinly veiled venomous hatred whenever she occasionally ventured downstairs to the main kitchens for specialty ingredients. It was during one of these rare trips downstairs that the illusion of her newfound safety shattered. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Dominic was out of the house, meeting with the heads of the 5 families. Clara had gone down to the wine cellar to fetch a specific bottle of 2015 Barolo that Dominic had requested for that evening. As she moved quietly through the dusty rows of vintage wines, she heard voices coming from the adjacent smoking room. It was Lorenzo speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Clara froze, pressing herself against the cold stone wall, her heart in her throat. "The boss is losing his edge," Lorenzo was saying. "He crippled one of my best men over a fat pig of a maid. He spends half his time locked in the penthouse with her. The Chicago boys think he's gone soft." "So what's the play?" a second grungier voice asked. Clara recognized it as Mickey, one of the enforcers from the docks. "The shipment from Palermo comes into Pier 40 tomorrow night," Lorenzo whispered. "Dominic insists on inspecting it himself. We tip off Detective Harris from the NYPD Organized Crime Task Force. Harris has been looking for a bust to make captain. He takes Dominic down. In the chaos, Dominic resists arrest. Harris shoots him. Tragic. I step up, take control of the family, and bring things back to the way they should be. What about the maid? Mickey asked. Clara heard Lorenzo chuckle a sound that made her stomach churn. Once Dom is in a body bag, I'm going to take my time with Miss Higgins. I owe her for this, he said, presumably pointing to his bruised neck. We'll toss her in the East River. She's so fat she'll probably float. Make it look like she jumped out of grief. Clara clapped both hands over her mouth to stifle a gasp. Tears streamed down her face. A coup. They were going to murder Dominic tomorrow night, and then they were coming for her. She waited in agonizing terror for the men to leave. When the heavy door of the smoking room finally clicked shut, Clara slid down the stone wall, her heavy body shaking uncontrollably. She had to warn Dominic, but if Lorenzo intercepted her, she was dead. She was no longer just the invisible maid. She was the only thing standing between Dominic Romano and a bullet in the dark. For the first time in her life, Clara realized she couldn't afford to be invisible anymore. She had to fight. Clara didn't run. If she ran, Lorenzo's men would know she had hurt them. Instead, she forced her trembling hands to grip the neck of the 2015 Barolo, took a deep, shuddering breath, and walked out of the wine cellar with heavy, deliberate steps. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she kept her gaze lowered, exactly as the invisible, clumsy maid was expected to do. Mickey was lounging near the base of the servants' stairs, tossing a silver Zippo lighter in the air. His eyes tracked her, lingering on the width of her hips with a sneer. "Watch your step, dumpling," Mickey grunted. "Boss wants that wine in one piece, not crushed under your feet." Clara bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. "Excuse me," she murmured, her voice meek. She squeezed past him, her thick thighs brushing the banister, and began the agonizing climb to the penthouse. Every step felt like walking through waist-deep water. The moment the heavy bulletproof doors of the penthouse hissed shut and locked behind her, Clara's facade crumbled. She dropped the expensive wine onto a plush sofa and paced the length of the Persian rug, her chest heaving. It was 3 p.m. Dominic wasn't due back from his sit-down at Il Mulino until long after midnight. She had no phone, domestic staff surrendered them at the gate, and she knew better than to trust any of the guards stationed outside the penthouse doors. Lorenzo was the underboss. He controlled the roster. Anyone outside that door could be a traitor. She had to wait. The agonizing ticking of the grandfather clock in the study became a cruel soundtrack to her anxiety. She spent the next 9 hours terrified, jumping at every creak of the floorboards, imagining Lorenzo's assassins breaching the elevator. She paced until her feet blistered in her soft slippers. At 1:15 a.m., the private elevator chimed. Dominic stepped out. He looked exhausted, the top button of his Brioni shirt undone, smelling of garlic espresso and the sharp tang of city rain. His eyes instantly found Clara, who was standing rigidly in the center of the living room, clutching the silk of her robe. His posture shifted immediately from fatigue to lethal alertness. He saw the sheer terror radiating from her. "Clara!" He crossed the room in 3 massive strides, his hands coming up to grip her upper arms. His touch was firm, grounding her spiraling panic. "What happened? Who came up here?" "No one." She gasped the words tumbling out of her in a frantic rush. "Dominic, I was in the cellar. I heard Lorenzo. He was with Mickey from the docks." She didn't call him Mr. Romano. The formality had burned away in the fires of her fear. Dominic's eyes narrowed imperceptibly at the drop in title, but he remained perfectly still, his thumbs rubbing soothing circles into her arms. "Tell me exactly what they said, word for word." Clara recited the conversation with photographic precision. She told him about Pier 40, about the shipment from Palermo, and the name that made the muscles in Dominic's jaw feather, Detective Harris. They're going to use Harris to shoot you during an arrest. Lorenzo takes the family. Clara choked out tears, finally spilling over her lashes. And then he said he's coming back here. For me. He said I'd float in the East River. A silence descended on the penthouse, so absolute, so heavy, it felt like the air had been sucked from the room. Dominic released her arms. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. The rage that emanated from him was entirely cold, a sub-zero fury that was infinitely more terrifying than any outburst. He walked over to his mahogany desk, opened a locked drawer, and pulled out a matte black Glock 19. He racked the slide with a sharp mechanical clack. "He thinks I'm soft," Dominic murmured the words laced with dark amusement. "He thinks because I let him keep his miserable life, after he disrespected you, I've lost my teeth." He turned back to Clara, his slate eyes assessing her. "You saved my life tonight, Clara. If you hadn't brought me this, I would have walked blindly into that warehouse." "What are you going to do?" she whispered, wrapping her arms around her heavy waist. "I am going to amputate the infection in my house," Dominic stated simply. He picked up a burner phone from the desk and dialed a single digit. "Matteo, wake up the loyalists. We have a rat problem. I need the armored Escalade out front in 10 minutes. And Matteo, call Captain Miller at the 14th Precinct. Tell him I have a present for his Internal Affairs Division regarding Detective Harris." Dominic hung up and walked back to Clara. "Get dressed. Dark clothes, flat shoes." Clara's eyes widened in horror. You want me to come with you? To a shootout?" "Lorenzo controls the house security tonight," Dominic said, stepping uncomfortably close, towering over her. "Once the hit goes wrong at Pier 40, his men here will realize I knew. They will storm this penthouse. I cannot protect you if you are not by my side. You are coming with me, Clara. I will not let them touch you." The air at Pier 40 was thick with the smell of rotting kelp diesel fumes and the metallic tang of the Hudson River. The midnight fog rolled off the black water, obscuring the massive steel shipping containers stacked like building blocks in the desolate loading yard. Clara sat trembling in the back of the blacked-out Cadillac Escalade. The heavy armored plating of the SUV felt like a tomb. Beside her sat Matteo Dominic's fiercely loyal enforcer, clutching a suppressed submachine gun. Outside, Dominic stood in the glow of the headlights, flanked by 4 men he trusted with his life. Lorenzo and his crew were waiting by a rusted shipping crate. Lorenzo wore a leather jacket and a confident, arrogant smirk. He thought he held all the cards. "Boss," Lorenzo called out, his voice echoing off the corrugated steel. "Shipment's inside, fresh off the boat from Palermo." From her vantage point, through the tinted bullet-resistant glass, Clara watched Dominic casually light a cigar. The flare of the match illuminated his sharp, predatory features. "Is it Enzo?" Dominic asked, his voice carrying effortlessly over the hum of the nearby generators. "Or is Detective Harris waiting inside that crate with a tactical team ready to put a bullet in my back?" Lorenzo's smirk vanished instantly. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost under the harsh, yellow security lights. "I don't know what you're talking about, Dom. Save it!" Dominic cut him off, his voice cracking like a whip. "Captain Miller's IA squad picked up Harris 20 minutes ago at a diner in Hell's Kitchen. Your dirty cop is currently singing about your little coup to save his own pension." Panic erupted. Lorenzo realized he was outplayed, outgunned, and entirely exposed. "Kill him!" Lorenzo shrieked to his men, drawing his own weapon. The pier exploded into deafening chaos. Gunfire tore through the fog. Muzzle flashes lit up the dark yard like strobe lights. Clara screamed, covering her ears and ducking as low as her large frame would allow against the leather seats. Matteo kicked his door open, using the armored frame of the Escalade for cover as he returned fire, neutralizing two of Lorenzo's men in seconds. Dominic moved with terrifying, lethal precision. He wasn't the soft, distracted boss Lorenzo had calculated him to be. He was the devil incarnate. He dropped Mickey with a single shot to the chest, advancing relentlessly through the hail of bullets, his dark coat billowing around him. Lorenzo, realizing his men were being slaughtered, turned and bolted like a coward. He sprinted away from Dominic, weaving through the shipping containers, heading straight toward the idling Escalade, desperately looking for an escape vehicle. Clara peeked over the door panel. She saw Lorenzo rushing the SUV, his face contorted in frantic terror. Matteo was pinned down on the opposite side, exchanging fire with a sniper on a catwalk. Lorenzo yanked the driver's side door open, intending to steal the car. He didn't see the fat Maid, hiding in the back seat. Adrenaline, pure and blinding, surged through Clara's veins. This man had abused her. He had mocked her body. He had plotted to murder the only person in this dark, twisted world who had ever looked at her with respect. She was not going to be a victim anymore. As Lorenzo scrambled into the driver's seat, his gun still in his hand, Clara lunged forward. She didn't have a weapon, but she had her mass. She threw her entire 240 pounds forward, slamming her forearm against the back of Lorenzo's neck and pinning him violently against the steering wheel. Lorenzo gagged, the wind knocked out of him by the sheer force of the impact. His gun clattered to the floorboards. "Get off me, you fat bitch!" He choked out wildly, thrashing his elbows backward, catching Clara in the ribs. Pain flared, but Clara didn't let go. She reached down her hand, closing around the heavy, solid steel Maglite flashlight Matteo kept wedged between the seats. With a feral cry, she swung it upward, bringing the heavy metal down viciously onto Lorenzo's wrist. A loud snap echoed in the cabin, followed by Lorenzo's agonizing scream. Clara shoved him hard, using her powerful legs to kick the heavy armored driver's side door shut right, as Lorenzo tried to spill out of the vehicle. The thick steel door slammed into his leg, pinning him between the frame and the seat. Suddenly the driver's side door was wrenched open from the outside. Dominic stood there, breathing heavily, his suit dusted with cordite and blood. He looked at Lorenzo, writhing and trapped, and then his eyes shifted to the back seat, landing on Clara. She was panting, her hair wild, gripping the bloody flashlight like a club. For a split second, Dominic just stared at her. Then a dark, incredibly proud smile touched the corners of his mouth. He reached in, grabbed Lorenzo by the collar of his leather jacket, and violently hauled the underboss out of the vehicle, throwing him onto the wet asphalt. Lorenzo groaned, clutching his shattered wrist and ruined leg. "You thought she was a joke, Enzo," Dominic said, coldly staring down at the broken man. "You thought she was weak because of her size, but she has more courage in her little finger than you have in your entire miserable body." Dominic raised his Glock. He didn't hesitate. Two silenced fit sounds echoed in the damp air, and Lorenzo stopped moving forever. The gunfire in the yard had ceased. Matteo and the loyalists had secured the pier. The coup was crushed. Dominic holstered his weapon and turned back to the SUV. He didn't order one of his men to help Clara. He stepped up to the back door himself, opening it wide. He reached in his large, rough hands, gently grasping her waist, and helped her step out of the heavy vehicle. Clara's adrenaline crashed. Her knees buckled, the reality of the violence suddenly washing over her. She began to sob, her heavy frame shaking violently. Dominic didn't say a word. He pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms securely around her back, burying his face in her dark hair. He didn't care about the blood on his suit or the fact that his men were watching. He held her tightly, anchoring her in the storm, his thumb stroking the soft curve of her spine. "You're safe," he murmured against her ear, his voice fiercely protective. "You're never hiding again, Clara." Never. The aftermath of Pier 40 was a blur of flashing sirens in the distance, hushed phone calls, and the smooth, rapid acceleration of the armored Escalade speeding away from the Hudson. Dominic didn't take Clara back to the upstate estate. Instead, they drove deep into the heart of Manhattan, pulling into the heavily guarded underground garage of a private pre-war brownstone on Sutton Place. It was Dominic's absolute safe house, a fortress of thick brick reinforced steel and absolute silence, far away from the prying eyes of the syndicate. Clara was ushered into a master bedroom that smelled of sandalwood and expensive clean linen. A private physician, Dr. Harrison, a discreet trauma surgeon on retainer from New York Presbyterian, arrived within 20 minutes. He bound Clara's bruised ribs and treated the nasty scrape on her forearm where she had pinned Lorenzo. Through it all, Dominic never left the room. He stood in the corner, his suit jacket discarded, his eyes tracking every movement the doctor made. When Dr. Harrison finally packed his black leather bag and departed, the heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving Clara and Dominic alone in the dim amber light of the bedside lamps. Clara sat on the edge of the massive four-poster bed, wearing one of Dominic's soft charcoal grey t-shirts. It draped over her heavy curves, clinging slightly to the bandages around her torso. She looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly from the phantom adrenaline. "I killed him." She whispered the reality of the violence, finally crashing through her shock. I held him down so you could—" Dominic crossed the room, his movements slow and deliberate. He sat beside her on the mattress, the springs groaning slightly under his weight. He reached out, taking her soft, trembling hands in his large, calloused ones. "You defended yourself. You defended my life." Dominic corrected his voice, a low, gravelly rumble that sent shivers down her spine. "Lorenzo was a dead man the second he plotted against me. You just ensured he didn't take us down with him. You are not a killer, Clara. You are a protector." He lifted her hands, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was so incredibly tender, so entirely at odds with the bloodbath she had just witnessed, that a fresh wave of tears pricked her eyes. "I don't belong in this world, Dominic," she confessed, her voice breaking. "Look at me. I'm a maid from Queens. I'm fat, I'm clumsy. I have absolutely nothing to my name except a mountain of medical debt. I don't know how to navigate cartels and hitmen." Dominic's jaw tightened. He reached over to the nightstand and picked up a heavy manila envelope, placing it in her lap. "Open it," he commanded softly. Clara hesitated before peeling back the clasp. Inside was a stack of official bank documents from Chase Manhattan, stamped with heavy red "paid" in full seals. Attached to them was the deed to her father's apartment in Queens, fully transferred into her name, completely unencumbered. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Dominic, what is this? I bought your father's debt 3 weeks ago." Dominic said, his slate eyes locked onto hers. "The hospital, the mortgage, the credit cards. It's all gone. You don't owe anyone a single dime. You never did." 3 weeks ago. Clara breathed, her mind spinning. "But why we were barely speaking then? I was still just bringing you coffee, because even then I knew," Dominic murmured, lifting his hand to cup her cheek, his thumb gently tracing the soft fullness of her jawline. "I watched you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, enduring the cruelty of lesser people, and you never lost your kindness. You think your size is a weakness, Clara. But I see a woman who takes up exactly the amount of space she deserves in this world. A woman with enough substance, enough gravity, to anchor a man like me." He leaned in the scent of cordite, replaced by his natural intoxicating musk. You are done being a maid. You are done hiding. Tomorrow night, the 5 families are holding a summit at the St. Regis to discuss the fallout of Lorenzo's treason. And you are walking into that room by my side. Panic flared in Clara's chest. The St. Regis with the commission. Dominic, they will laugh at you. They expect a supermodel on your arm, not... Let them laugh. Dominic interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper. I will cut the tongue out of any man who dares to disrespect you. But they won't laugh, Clara, because they will see what I see. A queen. He didn't give her a chance to argue. He leaned forward and captured her lips with his. The kiss wasn't rough or demanding. It was a slow, deliberate worship. He tasted her entirely, his large hands sliding down to grip her thick waist, pulling her heavy, soft body flush against his hard, muscular frame. Clara whimpered, her hands tangling in his dark hair. For the first time in her 26 years, she didn't feel the need to suck in her stomach or hide her thighs. Under Dominic's touch, she felt perfectly, undeniably beautiful. The private Astor Ballroom at the St. Regis, New York, was a monument to old-world wealth. Crystal chandeliers dripped from gold-leaf ceilings, illuminating the room where the most dangerous men on the eastern seaboard sat around a massive mahogany table. The air was thick with the smoke of imported Cuban cigars and the quiet, tense murmurs of the Chicago Philly and New York capos. They were waiting for Dominic Romano. Outside the heavy double doors, Clara took a deep, shuddering breath. She felt like an entirely different person. Earlier that day, Dominic had brought in a private tailor from Christian Siriano's atelier. She was currently poured into a custom, deep, emerald-green velvet gown that hugged every single curve of her 240-pound frame. The neckline dipped to reveal her ample cleavage, tasteful but undeniable, and a daring slit up the thigh allowed her to move with unexpected grace. Her dark hair was swept up into an elegant twist, and a heavy, flawless diamond pendant, a gift from Dominic, rested against her collarbone. Dominic stood beside her, looking like a dark god in a bespoke, 3-piece midnight blue suit. He looked down at her, his eyes burning with a possessive, consuming fire. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Clara lifted her chin. She thought of her father resting easily in his paid-off apartment. She thought of Isabella, the cruel housekeeper, banished forever. She thought of Lorenzo, broken on the asphalt. She was a survivor. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. Dominic nodded to the guards. The heavy oak doors were thrown open. The low hum of conversation in the Astor Ballroom died instantly. Every eye turned toward the entrance. Clara felt the immediate collective shock ripple through the room. These men were used to seeing mafia dons accompanied by frail, skeletal women who acted as silent, decorative ornaments. Instead, Dominic Romano walked in, with his hand resting firmly on the lower back of a full-figured, powerfully built woman who carried herself with absolute, unbothered dignity. They walked to the head of the table. Dominic pulled out a chair, not a small chair off to the side, but the heavy, velvet-lined armchair directly to his right, the seat traditionally reserved for the underboss. "Sit," he murmured to Clara. She did, keeping her posture perfect, her hands folded gracefully in her lap. Dominic remained standing, sweeping his cold, slate-grey gaze across the table. "Gentlemen," Dominic began, his voice echoing off the gold-leaf walls. "As you are aware, there was a cleansing in my house yesterday. Lorenzo is dead. He conspired with the NYPD to dismantle my operations. The rat has been exterminated, and the Romano family remains absolute." A murmur of agreement went around the table, but Vincent Bianchi, a brash, heavily scarred capo from the Chicago outfit, leaned back in his chair, his eyes trailing disrespectfully over Clara's thick thighs and heavy chest. "Glad to hear the business is secure, Dom." Vincent sneered, taking a drag from his cigar. "But I gotta ask, since when do we bring the kitchen staff to commission meetings? Didn't realize we were ordering dessert before the main course." The room went dead silent. The tension spiked so high it felt like the crystal chandeliers might shatter. Clara's heart hammered, but she didn't flinch. She looked directly at Vincent, her expression entirely blank. Dominic didn't yell. He simply reached into his jacket, pulled out his suppressed Glock 19, and placed it gently on the mahogany table with a heavy thud. "Vincent," Dominic said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "This woman is Clara Higgins. She is the one who uncovered Lorenzo's plot. She is the one who physically subdued an armed traitor at Pier 40 while my men were pinned down. She saved my life, and she saved this syndicate from a federal RICO indictment." Dominic leaned forward, planting his hands on the table, staring a hole through the Chicago capo. "She is my partner, in life and in this family. You will address her with the exact same respect you address me. If you ever look at her like a piece of meat again, I will personally guarantee that you leave this hotel in pieces. Do we have an understanding?" Vincent swallowed hard, the color draining from his scarred face. He looked at the gun, then up at Dominic's murderous eyes, and finally turned to Clara. My deepest apologies, Ms. Higgins." Vincent stammered, bowing his head slightly. "I spoke out of turn. We owe you a great debt." "Apology accepted, Mr. Bianchi," Clara said. Her voice was smooth, calm, and carried a quiet authority that shocked even herself. "Let's focus on the Palermo shipping routes, shall we? I believe the federal heat on Pier 40 means we need to divert the incoming manifests through the Newark terminals." The men around the table blinked in surprise. Not only was she fearless, but she understood the logistics. She had read the files on Dominic's desk. She had paid attention. Dominic looked down at her, a slow, incredibly proud smile spreading across his face. He sat down beside her, completely relaxed, the undisputed king of New York, sitting beside his chosen queen. Clara Higgins, the invisible overweight maid who used to cry in the kitchen, was gone forever. In her place sat a woman who had embraced her power, her body, and her worth. She was no longer hiding in the shadows. She was casting them. And as Dominic's hand found hers under the table, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles, Clara knew she would never apologize for taking up space ever again. If you loved this intense story of Clara's rise from a bullied, insecure maid to the powerful queen of the Romano Mafia empire, make sure to show some love, hit that like button, share this video with your friends who love a dark, twisty romance with amazing plus-size representation, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another thrilling real-life story. Let us know in the comments. What was your favorite twist?